Hey, War Pugs. So, it's time for the Battle of Fort A-453. Now, A-453, I can't remember the number of our good old Kriegsguardsman, but this guy is an absolute thunder Chad, and you're about to learn about him. I This would be an excellent thing to show someone who has never watched anything about 40K, but someone who loves like kings and generals, things like that, is presented in that fashion. And I actually really dig it. So, I'm not going to say too much more. I've already done an introduction. You guys have seen it before. Let's just get into it. Let's go. It's time for the first energy drink
So
of the day.
far, the Imperium had clearly underestimated the Vraxian defenders' strength.
True.
Despite repeated attempts to break through, Zafin's forces had viciously resisted and successfully withstood the Death Corps' assaults across the entire out-of-defensive line. The rapid early gains that the 88th Siege Army's High Command anticipated had simply not materialized.
This is mainly due to the fact their general was a piece of crap.
But not only that, the enemy had proven themselves capable of organizing dangerously effective counterattacks, showing the Death Corps that this siege would not just be a one-sided affair, as was previously assumed. For over 6 months now, the front lines have been facing a grinding stalemate, and the traitors' outer defensive lines still showed no real signs of cracking. The one advantage the Imperium had was that more men and material could continually be supplied from the wider Imperium to bolster the already existing Death Corps forces. The Imperium maintained their strong control of the sector and space around Vraks, meaning no traitor replacements could be smuggled onto the planet. This meant the Vraxians would be reliant on their existing stockpiles, which would of course eventually run out. The continuous artillery barrages continued to take its toll on both sides. But considering the large amount of reserves and materials still safely stored underneath the citadel, at this rate of attrition the siege of Vraks would likely continue for almost another century.
Yep.
As such, it seemed that the Imperium's initial plan of an 11-year-long siege had turned out to be severely optimistic in hindsight. But High Command of the 88th Siege Army was not going to disband their carefully laid out plans and strategies so easily.
Why do that when you can hurl bodies at it?
They were still looking for a way to break the stalemate, and so new waves of probing attacks to find weak points in the enemy lines would continue at all costs. One such probing attack was to be carried out by the 261st Regiment's 9th Company, against a defensive position called Fort A-453.
Get ready to
Fort
learn about the Thunder Chad.
A-453 is a stronghold of interlinked bunkers and pillboxes. It had already been damaged during previous bombardments, and some of its stationary guns had even been knocked out entirely. But the battered defenses still consist of interlocking fields of heavy bolter fire and thick layers of barbed wire which stretched out in front of the fort. But perhaps, most importantly, it is surrounded by an anti-tank ditch and minefields that would make any motorized assault against the sector virtually impossible.
Yay!
But that's not all. Underneath the bunkers is an elaborate network of underground shelters and tunnels. One large underground entrance tunnel connected many miles behind the front lines. This simply allowed the Vraxian defenders to safely enter the fortress, protected from any enemy bombardments on the surface above. Whenever the fortress had come under attack before, the defenders had sent in fresh reinforcements through this tunnel and successfully held onto the fort with relative ease. The risky attack on these formidable defenses was tasked to Captain Tyborg and his troops of the 9th Company. At first light, he would lead the attack himself, while a large battery of thud guns would assist their approach over no man's land. There was not much special going on about this assault. In fact, it was considered just a regular probing attack, one of many that were scheduled across the entirety of the outer defensive lines. For High Command, attacks such as these were mere data points in the larger campaign plans. They weren't expected to take the fort, nor even to necessarily reach it. It was estimated that half of 9th Company would perish in the charge over no man's land before the attack on Fort A-453 would even be called off. But Captain Tyborg and his men, all being loyal soldiers of the Death Corps of Krieg, would perform their suicidal orders just the same. On the fateful morning of the attack,
Orders are orders are orders to a Kriegsman. If you don't know this already, welcome to Krieg. God, I love these guys.
the troops of the 9th Company gathered in the front line trenches. Offensive saps had already been dug to reduce the distance over no man's land so they could reach the fort as quickly as possible. With that, the whistle sounded. The cannons opened up and Captain Tyborg himself was amongst those first up the ladders. Followed by his men, he rushed out of the trenches and led the assault across no man's land from the front. Fortunately for them, the favorable wind had blown the smoke from the Thud gun bombardment their way.
Oh.
This thick cloud of dust covered their approach towards the enemy fortress. Before the enemy had even become aware of the infantry advance, the 1st Death Corps troops had reached the barbed wire already. With their bolt cutters in hand, they had already started creating paths through the wire.
Bolt cutters. That's not good enough for a Death Corpsman. Throw your body on it and let people walk over you. Go!
As the smoke cleared, the defenders became aware of what was going on, and in short order, the heavy bolters of the Vraksians had opened up. Within minutes, the relentless heavy fire had already mowed down a large number of Death Corps soldiers, who had by now mostly hid themselves into shell holes and behind whatever obstacles they could find, in order to create any form of cover to protect them from the onslaught. But the captain and his troops in the vanguard had already cut themselves a path through the barbed wire and plunged themselves deep down into the anti-tank ditch. Here, they were relatively safe from the worst of the enemy's bolter fire, and could start to return fire in an organized fashion. Despite heavy casualties, the rest of the 9th Company now managed to cut more paths through the barbed wire defenses. The anti-tank ditch, serving as a makeshift trench, soon filled with Imperial soldiers as the Death Corps were now swarming in their captain's wake.
Absolute thunder, Chad.
Once enough troops had gathered, they prepared themselves to directly charge against the enemy bunkers, and then the orders came in to affix their bayonets.
Yes!
At the captain's command, they scrambled up and out of the anti-tank ditch and rushed across the last remaining strip of land that stood between them and the enemy defenders. Unbeknownst to them, they first had to cross over the dangerous minefields.
Yay!
Many Death Corps soldiers blew up in devastating explosions as they stepped on the mines. Yet again, the 9th Company took heavy casualties. But
Yeah, but they're happy about it, you know? They're so happy about it. It's like happy gas mask noises. Those aren't shrieks of pain. Those are happy gas mask noises because they're about to fulfill their duty to the Emperor.
following their captain who was leading from the front, they simply kept coming, almost entirely clearing the minefield in the process. The soldier next to Captain Tyborg evaporated in a blast of smoke.
Yay.
Blood and body parts were scattered everywhere. Tyborg himself was wounded by a shard of bone from the exploding soldier that struck him in the leg.
That hurts.
However, limping forward, he continued to lead the assault on the bunkers. With the Death Corps already inside of the wire and over the minefields, some of the renegade troops raced towards their enemy in an attempt to meet them in hand-to-hand combat.
This is bad.
Meanwhile, other lesser troops, mostly those of the militia, believed their position would be lost and began to abandon their defenses in a panic. Soon the whole fort was in total chaos and confusion as the bloody close combat ensued. With many of the Vraksians now on the run, they had a potential breakthrough on their hands. But the battle wasn't over just yet.
No.
As now more disciplined Vraksian defenders came out of their underground defenses to repel the invaders. If Captain Tyborg wished to maximally exploit the breakthrough, he would need reinforcements fast. He would need to inform High Command of his situation, but in the confusion of the melee, his Vox operator assistant had been killed and the equipment lost.
Well, that sucks.
Instead, he chose to summon a runner that would rush back towards the Death Corps front lines and deliver the following message. 9th Company within wire. enemy numbers growing in strength will hold if reinforced.
Yes.
The runner would have to run back over the now nearly empty minefield, through the wire and back over no man's land to inform higher command of the situation. Meanwhile, Tyborg and his men continued their battle throughout the fortress complex, pushing the defenders back in several places.
Oh, yes.
But the Vraksians had already learned a lesson or two from the Imperium. Their artillery suddenly opened up as they began shelling their own lines in a desperate attempt to stop the enemy advance.
Yeah.
On the blood-soaked surface, the ground erupted as their artillery started raining down upon anyone caught out in the open.
Come on. Like, you can't let them just do that. Start shelling, too. The Imperium needs to start shelling, like, right now. Earthshaker rounds all around here. I want them here, here, and here. It'll be fine, trust me.
Captain Tyborg was wounded for the second time by a piece of shrapnel. But in a desperate struggle, he and 40 of his closest troops had managed to fight his way inside of the underground defenses.
Nice.
And this was not a moment too soon. Within seconds, the artillery barrage intensified and everyone was caught on the outside, including the remaining soldiers of the 9th Company and the Vraksian defenders alike. They were all blasted to absolute bits by the ruthless explosions.
Yeah, welcome to 40K. We have more men for that.
As the barrage quieted down, Tyborg and his small company were the only Imperial troops who had escaped the deadly bombardment.
We have more than enough men for this. Don't worry about it. We're fine.
Meanwhile, those fleeing Vraksians who had earlier escaped the battle had by now been intercepted by Zafin's forces. After swift disciplinary action, the defenders turned around and made their way back towards the front lines. The Vraksians were now quickly bringing up large amounts of reinforcements through the main access tunnel to recapture Fort A-453.
Yeah, but there's a problem with
But as
that.
fate would have it, Tyborg and his remaining troops found themselves in the hallway where this main tunnel entered the fortress. This was, of course, the perfect place to block any reinforcements from entering.
Yep.
As they heard the Vraksians coming, they quickly prepared their defenses and set up an ambush to hold the choke point. The first Vraksians who re-entered the complex were surprised to find themselves welcomed by the warmth of the Death Corps lasguns. Tyborg and his men opened fire with devastating volleys of lasgun shots that decimated the closely packed Vraksian reinforcements. In their panic, the upcoming troops fled back inside of the tunnel. But yet again, Zafin's forces were not going to let them run away from the battle a second time.
Oh, come on.
To set an example and to return some form of discipline in their cowardly ranks, some of the militia were shot dead on the spot.
Nice.
Caught between the well-defended choke point held
Yes, meat's back on the menu, boys.
by the Death Corps, or facing the guns of their own enforcers, the militiamen reluctantly followed orders and prepared for the attack. Urged on at gunpoint, the Vraksians now charged back into the hallway. But without the element of surprise this time, Tyborg and his troops would have a much more difficult fight ahead of them.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the runner that had dispatched earlier had miraculously survived and successfully made it through no man's land.
Nice.
Finally, he arrived and delivered the message to the local commander, General Durjan. This was the news High Command had all this time been waiting for, after months of stalemate. Unexpectedly, here, at Fort A-453, there was finally a potential crack in the enemy lines.
Yes.
Durjan quickly spread the news across the front, and the whole army set into motion to exploit the situation. Durjan immediately sent his own veteran grenadier units to reinforce Captain Tyborg, and the local artillery would be rolled forward. They were tasked with producing a curtain of supportive artillery fire that would cut off Fort A-453 from further enemy reinforcements as much as was possible. This would do nothing to stop the Vraxian troops from coming up in the tunnel below, but
Right.
at the very least it would stop the enemy from reinforcing the fortress from above ground and bringing up further tank brigades. Meanwhile, the Death Corps would bring up tanks of their own to secure the fortress.
Lehman
The
Russ.
88th Siege Army Command was well aware that this opportunity was too good to be allowed to simply go to waste. And
True.
all along the front lines, diversion attacks were launched to take away pressure from the breakthrough at Fort A-453. But all of this would take time. Precious time that
Yep.
Tyborg and his few remaining men, who were fighting off this simply unending wave of reinforcements coming up the tunnel, could ill afford. In this choke point, they were able to fight off a much larger Vraxian force, but they were running out of ammunition. Already several troops had emptied all of their rifles, laspacks, and resorted to using pistols, or even hand-to-hand weapons. In between the enemy assaults, the Death Corps soldiers took to looting the Vraxian corpses for any ranged weapons they could find. They would pick up grenades, stubbers, lasguns, pistols, flamethrowers, anything from the dead, and then rush back to their defensive positions to fight off the next wave.
Hooray!
This way, they valiantly defended the entrance, but their dwindling numbers meant they could not hold on forever. Even Captain Tyborg had been wounded again, for the third time now.
Yep.
A glancing gunshot to the side of his head
Give that man a sacrifice.
had knocked off his helmet and left him profusely bleeding. Despite his severe wounds, he still managed to command his troops as they desperately held onto their positions for the remainder of the day. They were now down to just 16 men. Where are those damned reinforcements? Unbeknownst to Tyborg and his men, the Vraxians had now fully committed to the recapture of Fort A-453. If they couldn't take back the fortress from the entrance tunnel underground, they would try above ground. The Vraxians had sent their infantry over the plains through the Imperial bombardment with the plan to re-enter the fortress and flank the 9th Company from behind. Fortunately for Captain Tyborg, the grenadiers that had been sent to reinforce him arrived as well and intercepted the Vraxian movements. Fierce fighting in the ruins of Fort A-453 now commenced.
Yay!
The Vraxian command, frustrated by their inability to secure the fortress, sent in even more troops. But the fresh
You see, here's the problem with sending in more troops against Krieg. They don't mind that. In fact, they encourage that. War of attrition is kind of their thing. It makes them happy in the pants.
elite grenadier troops were able to stop the Vraxians from entering the fortress. Meanwhile, 3 companies of the 61st Tank Regiment, including a Baneblade heavy tank,
Oh, I
were thrown
forgot
into battle
that.
around the fortress.
Oh,
They were accompanied by a squad of Atlas excavators, each
yay!
equipped with a dozer blade to fill in the anti-tank ditch. Many Atlases were destroyed in the process, but they successfully managed to fill the ditch. As you may remember, the minefield had already been cleared out earlier by the men of the 9th Company. With these obstacles out of the way, Lehman Russes and the Baneblade itself now rolled forward, joining the Grenadiers and smashing everything in their path. More troops of the 30th Line Corps followed in their wake, and
Very
soon
nice.
the Vraxians were pushed back west over the plains, back towards the 2nd defensive line, all the way being relentlessly pursued by the 61st Tank Regiment. The Grenadiers made their way underground, where they found the remaining men, the few remaining men of the 9th Company. Of the original assault on Fort A-453 that had started 3 days prior, all that was left were 9 wounded men,
Yes.
including the heroic Captain Tyborg with severe wounds in both legs, his right arm, his abdomen, and the glancing hit to his head. But he was alive, and the fort had now been captured.
Yay!
The breakthrough had come, and the entirety of the 8th Assault Corps had now made their way through the breach and started rolling up on the enemy's front line to either side of it.
Hooray!
Attacked from the front and the flanks, the Vraxians realized their positions were no longer tenable and started to abandon their defenses en masse. They knew there was simply a second defensive line to fall back to,
Yep.
and so they quickly did. The once so heavily defended outer front lines were quickly falling apart as the entire 88th Siege Army moved forward over largely undefended terrain. Here and there they were being held up by small pockets of rearguard resistance,
And the minefields. But we have people for that.
but these were nothing like the killing fields that the Death Corps had faced before. After 2 whole years of bitter attritional warfare, the outer defensive line had finally collapsed in its entirety, and soon the 88th Siege Army would now encircle the second defensive line. New offenses would be launched from there. With this hopeful news of victory, some figureheads in high command already announced that perhaps the siege of Vraks could be finished within the estimated time frame of 12 years after all.
Yay!
If only they knew.
Hooray! Guys, don't you just love it when a plan comes together? Don't you just love it when a plan just comes together and, accidents happen? Bad things occur? So, Vraks is, like I said, one of those battles. You have a few that are absolutely, like, the devastation of Baal. You have the Battle of Macragge with the Tyranids. You have Armageddon, of course, against the Orcs. You have Rindsworld against the Orcs. You have, you have the entire Gothic War. And then you have Vraks. Some of the best documented wars of the Imperium. But Vraks is a lot of people's personal favorite, and it's for a reason. And I absolutely love the Death Corps of Krieg. I absolutely love the Death Corps of Krieg. So, if you don't like the Death Corps of Krieg, well, you just love the Tau, don't you? Guys, this is Janovich's pet project. I love it. I absolutely love that he has put this thing together like this. It looks awesome. The presentation is awesome, like I have said before. So if you have not subscribed to him yet, I recommend that you do so. He doesn't just produce this. He has produced some. His trailer for Vraks was amazing, and frankly, I was hoping that GW. One day that GW will be like, can you guys start doing fan animations again? Because those got really popular. All things being said, I'm going to head out from here. I know you guys have been saying you can't wait for episode 5. Now I'm going to be seeing you guys say you can't wait for episode 6. 100% guys, Vraks is one of those battles. That being said, Janovich's links are going to be in the description down below, right next to my own. I recommend that you guys go give them a look. As far as myself, my links are down there as well. And I will catch you guys next time. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm out.